Okay, good morning, everybody. Is it still morning? Or good afternoon? Good afternoon. Please make yourselves comfortable. We're a nice, quaint bunch in here. My name is Christy Zamani. I'm the Executive Director for Day One. Thank you to Lisa and the team for putting this amazing day together for us. We will be recording this so the people who aren't here can view this online and so we can share it later. But we're going to jump right in to make good use of our times, and I'm going to invite our panelists to just briefly introduce themselves.
Is it morning or afternoon?
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Soulriver. I'm a commercial real estate broker with NAI Capital Commercial and also a member of Pasadena Heritage. So I love preservation, and I am an environmentalist at heart. So I love the idea of reusing anything we have and reimagining spaces. And I'm going to pass it on to Karin from Omgivning.
You can keep that.
Hi, I'm Karin Liljegren. I'm principal and founder of Omgivning. So we're an architecture and interiors firm, and we specialize in adaptive reuse. And now we specialize in relocating homes. That's the next panel. But we have focused on adaptive reuse for about 25 years, and through policy reform and actual executed projects, and adaptive reuse is again changing the use of an existing building to a new use, such as housing.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Lisa Odigie. I am a program director at Day One and also a licensed real estate agent with Compass. And I am very happy to have you here to talk about this really interesting subject. And I'm sure all of you have been driving around LA and you look at an empty building and you're like, we could use that. That's why we're having this conversation, because I think most of us are wondering, why can't we do that? And if we can, why can't we just make that happen? So that's why we're here to have this conversation, particularly here in Pasadena, in light of the things that have happened. So.
Wonderful. And as we get into that conversation, so this workshop is about adaptive reuse, and a lot of us don't know what that means. We'll say, like, what is that? So hopefully this session will cue us up for the following session. So Karin, if you can start us off with just explaining what is adaptive reuse.
So what is adaptive reuse? So if we go big scale, if we go back 25 years ago, say downtown LA, there was this whole historic core that was completely empty and all these incredible old buildings. And the city created a policy which really incentivized these buildings to be converted from their old use, which was office, to a new use of housing. I converted about 14 buildings in downtown to housing and mixed use residential. And it created, I think the number is 14,000 housing units, right? So that's a really big scale example. I just want you to envision for a second something that might be more appropriate for Pasadena in the San Gabriel Valley. So think about, for example, a main street, a commercial main street. You know, you're driving through a commercial area in Main Street. And just think, even right now, how many of those buildings might have for lease signs or are very underutilized. So there's a lot of potential to convert some of those buildings to other uses. So think of, say, a strip mall. A strip mall actually converts really well to housing. If you think about, you remove the part of the parking and you make that outdoor space or garden space or private outdoor space, that strip mall now can become housing. Or maybe there's housing on the second floor and you keep the retail on the first floor. Another example might be a church. A lot of times, a lot of churches are really struggling right now, and there's incredible buildings with a lot of accessory spaces, like where they have their educational facilities or Sunday school, etc. Especially those portions of a church building really convert well to housing. So that's another kind of example. And the last example I want to throw at you is, think of a little Main Street, USA kind of thing, maybe little 1 or 2 story buildings, brick buildings, and if you think about how our world has changed so much that people work from home part-time or they have their own little business, so in those scenarios it would work really well to have, say, okay, I have a small bakery, I just have a kitchen and I have a small bakery in the front on the commercial side of the street, Main Street, USA, and in the back, maybe I live in the back. And instead of having parking in the parking, I have now my outdoor space with some parking. So there's a lot of ways. It's just we have to rethink the way that we live and think about not just retail's here, offices here, residential's here. The more that we can blend these uses, the more that we have really resilient and thriving communities.
Thank you, Karin. And you know, Karin has a wealth of expertise in this area, and we're gonna come back to you for some more in a bit. But Lisa, can you tell us, why are we talking about this today?
Sure. So all of you are here because you either know someone who lost their home in Altadena, or you have lost your home in Altadena. I lost our home in Altadena right on Olive, so the detour that you took up here, you drove past our lot. And I just want to acknowledge, I know that it may have been hard for some of you to come up here today, for those of you who have lost, and I do understand that very deeply. It was a hard decision, but I do want us to honor the space and also recognize that it's up to us to really take charge of what's going to happen as residents and as community members. So this conversation has really come up because over the last 6 months, myself along with, at this point, at least 180 different community partners have been trying to figure out how to meet the very, very dire housing need for many of our residents who were displaced that were not homeowners. They may have been the renters, could have been those who were multi-generational, so they were living with family. And we have now identified a pocket in our community who just don't qualify for anything in LA County. And it's not even just affordability. Even if we find something affordable, they're not qualifying. They may not have rental history, they may not have credit history, they may not have work history. So there's a number of things that they are facing that doesn't allow them to access housing. And so now we have hundreds of folks who just have nowhere to live. So the conversation has come up, and what do we do? And thinking long term, although our homeowners can rebuild, we might be able to do the corridor, and we can even think on it as a community, but on an individual level, how do we house those families again and keep them close? And that's how we got to this conversation, which is, what do we do with all that is available? There's not enough housing, and we know that. So what is available, and can we reuse that to be housing for our families? And that's pretty much how we got to this space. And so we really want to engage our neighboring cities. A lot of our families are way too far. They're in Long Beach, they're in Lancaster, they're in Riverside. Some have just relocated out of state because there isn't anything close enough to home. So this conversation isn't just for Altadena, but it's for all of our neighboring cities as well. Because if we can keep our families geographically closer, the research shows that they are less likely to leave and be permanently displaced. So the closer we can keep our families, the more likely it is that they can return.
Thank you, Lisa. Anna, can you tell us a little bit about how this fits into the bigger picture when we think about climate, sustainability, and building back better?
Sure. How many of you have heard that the greenest building is the one already built? So it's the idea of reutilizing what we have, of recycling, of not simply demoing a building and being wasteful. When you think about it too from a neighbor perspective, right? If you're right next to a building that is highly vacant, it creates different problems. Amongst them, you don't have a thriving community for retail, foot traffic, different things. But if you demo that building, you create greenhouse emissions, you create carbon print, and also you're disturbing the neighborhood. Versus when you think of a building and you look at it and you simply say, okay, this building is vacant, why is it vacant, and what is it that we really need? So in the bigger picture, it is a great thing to do both environmentally and for the housing crisis. So it's almost social justice at its finest, in the sense that you can take a building that is underutilized and convert it into something that is better for the planet and for the community and the neighbors, and just great housing overall.
Thank you. Karin, can you walk us back through now, like what can we do as a community in this sphere of work?
Okay, it's
challenging.
It's challenging. So the largest challenges with reusing a building is it's either a zoning thing where you're not allowed to just change that use, like maybe you're not allowed to have housing in that use. And then, so making that by right. So City of Los Angeles We've had one in downtown Hollywood and Koreatown, but now that they're just implementing an ordinance this month. Now we're in August for the entire city of Los Angeles. So that's pretty large, right? That makes that process by right, meaning, yeah, you can change it to housing, no big deal. Pasadena also just passed an ordinance which allows this, so that is huge. So that's the zoning side. Now the building and fire code, all the like building code side, that's a little bit more tricky, and that really has to do with getting the various cities and their agencies on board with this. For them to understand the urgency, there can be executive directives, which ain't way too many of those crazy ones, coming nationally, but you can also do them in your cities, right? So City of LA, they issued one as it got kind of sidetracked with fires and many other issues that the city's dealing with, but an executive directive can say, hey, make this a priority. We need to these buildings are empty right now. We can convert that office building to housing right now. So let's make it happen right now. So I would say that's one big way to get involved, because it's really about the finances to make these projects work. They're not gonna go on their own. They need incentives.
And while you have the mic, can you start us off with one adaptive reuse project that was really successful that you can share with us?
I don't know if I have one.
At least, or
but
many?
There's, let's see. Oh, in fact, the one that's up there right now. It was a YMCA in San Pedro, and we converted it to housing and also a lot of community services that can be shared with the residents that are in the building. The reason if it had had that ordinance, it would have really kind of sailed through. It got kind of caught by the pandemic and other various things, but it had the financing. It was a historic building, so it got historic tax credits and all that kind of stuff.
Thanks. Do either of you want to answer that question too, or are you good? Like a successful adaptive reuse project?
Do you want to?
You need money, and you need incentives from the city, and you need a group of the development team and the architecture and engineering team that really knows what they're doing.
So was the question about a specific project or just overall what is needed to be a success for it to be a successful?
No, just a successful project that you would share with the group.
Well, I've had 2 buildings for adaptive reuse in Pasadena. One of them was over in Elizabeth. It used to be a dormitory to a university. Then it became office to the organization. So it was office, it had been dormitory. Now it is, I'm not sure the size of the units, but it is multi-units. But that's an example that when we sold it, I'm pretty sure the developer ended up not on a positive side. So that's the problem with a lot of the adaptive reuse problems. It's the financial equation for the developer doing the project. The other adaptive reuse project, and this one I guess is interesting because it got converted into office, was it was a former meat market over in Colorado Street, and I forget the intersection. But it had uneven floors, uneven walls, and the architect turned it into his office studio, and now it's all electrical, which goes along with Mandate 9977 about Pasadena being carbon-free by 2030, which Pasadena 100, if you're not familiar with is a big supporter of. So I think when I talk about social justice, I mean to say that adaptive reuse, the greenest building is the one already built. It's environmentally sound to reuse the spaces that we have, but we have to incentivize the owners and the people with vacancies to want to reimagine their spaces. And for that, we have to make the math work, and ultimately it involves policy and finances.
Thank you, Anna. Lisa, as someone who grew up in Altadena and has gone through this, what are the opportunities you see when we talk about this subject for this community?
To be fair, it's hard to picture it here in Altadena because I want Altadena to be Altadena again. So it's hard to imagine, I'll say, like as a resident and someone who's very much a strong proponent of adaptive reuse, I am still trying to figure out what that looks like here. Because I know on the one hand, we want to preserve Altadena, and on the other hand, we want to house Altadena. And those two things don't exactly go hand in hand. So there just isn't enough space to house as many people as we need. So how I see this is really, like I mentioned before, is I envision this as a San Gabriel Valley-wide initiative, where, again, this is why our neighboring cities are going to be very, very imperative to making this successful. So my parents are currently displaced to Arcadia. I'm driving to Arcadia all the time. I'm currently displaced to Glendale. So I'm driving around and I constantly see buildings, and every time I see one, I take the address down, I take the phone number down, and I'm like, I'm gonna figure out if this can be something, right? And that sort of energy is what I feel for Altadena. It's really gonna be the San Gabriel Valley as a response to this problem, and using the spaces across our neighboring cities.
Thank you for that. I want to make some space. I know this is a really short panel, which is challenging, but I wanted to honor you all for being in the room and ask you if you have any questions before we move on to anything else. Yes, Cynthia.
Hi. This is really interesting, and it's making me think of a question. So I heard Anna said the math has to work, and I gather that's kind of the central problem. You want to use an old structure and make it beautiful and do adaptive reuse. So I'm thinking about the schools in Pasadena, for example, the Linda Vista School, which is a big controversy in that neighborhood. I think the most profitable use for the school district, if that's all we care about, is sell the property and let people develop expensive single-family homes. I think that's what some people think should happen. Then you have other people who want to use the structure, which is an old kind of interesting 1960s style structure, but there's no way to make the math work on that. So one thought I have is you have all of this need for solar energy all over the city. I mean, the city of Pasadena enters into hundreds of billion-dollar contracts to get electricity. Would it work to have, to be able to restore old buildings and have a solar structure on them that would be leased so that the city could buy the electricity? And that way maybe you would be profitable. And the same for housing. I mean, if somebody wants to rebuild their house in Altadena, could they have rooftop solar and then that energy could be sold back? I'm trying to think of how to make the math work.
I think you're onto such a important conversation, Cynthia. And we have a lot of interesting conversations at the office, at the water cooler. And one of it is, we never really get to work from ground zero, which we're working at in Altadena, right? So that makes us rethink about everything from water capture to solar. Like if we're gonna build back, and that's why we keep on saying build back better. We have a blank slate to really rethink how we do this, and maybe really getting clear on where are the opportunities for us to pull in philanthropy and the cities, the municipalities to support that. Because the upfront cost is too much for residents, right? But how can we support them in
You
that?
make money is what I'm saying.
Exactly.
You have to be supplied
Yes.
with electricity.
And also it's
100%.
about getting creative with how to reuse a building or
Right.
to build a building with multiple uses, right? Which, if it's a city-owned, city, county, there's so many publicly owned buildings and properties that are really underutilized. And so there's some that are looking at, okay, so they could do a master lease, so they're not actually selling it, but they basically
Right.
do a master lease for like nothing. So then that eliminates the acquisition cost. But then these layers of creativity, like, oh yeah, so what if the whole roof could be leased out to a solar farm or an urban farm or well, maybe not out here. That's more of a downtown LA thing. But, so these different uses so that you can, again, put the housing in, that it's subsidized in some way.
But I will say that is something really cool and unique for Altadena, being that is LA County. We are the area that has horses and chicken coops and everything else. We're different. So I think even people coming together, neighbors saying, hey, we want that piece of land and we're gonna make it into our Altadena chicken coop or our farmland. I think you get to have these conversations right now, and I think we haven't gotten there yet as a community to have very meaningful visioning conversations about not just my house, but my neighborhood. And there's a lot of power in that. And I think that's something that's gonna be very, very inspiring once we get there. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that you're opening up the vision to all of the surrounding cities, because when we are talking about interim housing, between now and when we get people back on their land, we can't wait for things to be built, and it's such a great idea to reuse something that is already built, and maybe it will go a little bit quicker to rebuild inside of a shell that's already there. So I care so much, I'm part of the Pasadena Community Land Trust effort. We have a table in the other room, just to give a little pitch for ourselves. What we're trying to do is get 501c3 nonprofit status, and a community land trust oftentimes does buy an existing building, usually a residential building, but the trust holds the land underneath the building and actually buys out whoever the owner was. And then the building that is atop it is actually owned, usually a cooperative model, by the people who live there. So it's an affordable housing option, and it dovetails with what we're talking about here. I'd love to partner with all of you guys, because we're trying to find what is the quickest way for our trust to provide housing to displaced Altadenians, because our whole mission is about anti-displacement, and that's what we care about. So I love that you guys have this panel, and let's talk.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I'll say, you know, and I'm talking with Karin and with Anna and with Christy and with many of you actually about this topic. You know, we're seeing such an influx of money here, right? And everyone is wondering, what are we doing with all this money? Who's going to do what? And how will it have the greatest impact for our community? And in my mind, something like this is where the infusion of philanthropy, like you mentioned, this is where that money can go to help make the math make sense. Because ultimately, when we're talking about this calculation of why adaptive reuse isn't just done all over the nation, it's because right now, financially, from an investment standpoint, it doesn't really, the math doesn't work out. So typically when you present this, it doesn't work out. But if you can infuse philanthropy into this process, the math can work. And so we're like, we have all of this money coming in, and everyone is like, what should we do with it? This is how we can house our families and keep them close.
Yeah, so I've been obsessed with adaptive reuse for the longest time, and to give you a little bit of background, I'm from Colombia. So in Colombia, at a young age, they teach you that the Amazon are the lungs of the earth, that the environment is king, that you're taking care of Mother Earth, of nature, right? Really, the reason people pay to go on vacations is to see nature. So like, why wouldn't you take care of it here in your backyard? And going back to being the greenest building is the one already built, and being the most environmental sound to do, and we have both an environmental and housing crisis, right? But what does it take to do that? And I talk to developers all the time. My favorite adaptive reuse architect, her name is, I think, something like Karin at Omgivning. She's focused on that. But we go to developers, we go to different people all the time for these projects, but the answer tends to be the math doesn't make sense. Like, why am I going to spend X amount of money on this building to reuse it? You're going to spend at least $400 per square foot to reuse it, but then you're only going to get X amount of money. And then if you're a developer who's going to go buy the building that is empty, you basically have to buy the building at $0 per square foot. So I mean, I think what Lisa is saying is like, I feel like Cinderella. Like, I just found Prince Charming. We need this kind of money, this kind of philanthropy to initiate a new way of doing development, and adaptive reuse is that channel, because it's environmentally sound, and we need housing. And the fires, very sad, are an example of a climate crisis that we have, and we need to rethink how we do our structures and all the things we do.
Thank you, Anna. Well, thank you all. I know, again, this was a very short panel, but we have a wonderful other panel that's about to start. So I want to say thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of you. If you want to take a break, you can, but I really encourage you, if you want to learn about these exciting homes that Karin's company is helping bring to Altadena, like, you would want to stay and hear about that.
Yeah,
thank
so
you all.
The next session is on really just about building and how to rebuild and what the costs are associated. So whatever path you take, we can do like a little bit of a cost difference. And then Morgan from Omgivning is going to talk about the historic home project, which is where they're buying demolition homes and bringing them to lots in Altadena. So that's a really
exciting. Saving them from demolition.
Saving them from demolition and bringing them to Altadena. So very cool session coming up. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
So at least
It all worked.